Welcome to another episode of Bright Insights, the podcast that leads you to less stress and more success. Here's your host, Paul Bright.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Bright Insights. I am your host, Paul Bright. O is for optimism. The bottom line up front is that optimism inspires progress. Optimism inspires progress. I am recording this episode at the end of 2020. For all you future listeners who are listening back 10, 20, 30 years from now, look in the history books and you'll see that 2020 was arguably one of the worst years for the entire universe. Well, the entire Earth. Okay. We had a global pandemic. We had a virus that killed a lot of people. It was highly contagious. We hardly had time to figure out what to do. And even when we did figure out what to do as a universe, it was still finding ways to spread. It was still difficult to do. But as you're listening to this, we have gotten through it, or we've gotten over the humps, and we learned a lot. And that's a bit of what I'm talking about, is the optimism right here. So let's get back to today. For you new listeners, especially you new leaders, listen up. It's going to be tough to convince people of positive things in times like this, but when you can do it, when you have some realistic optimism, it's going to push you so far as a leader, and it's going to push your organization so far because you'll be able to look back and say, look what we were able to come out of and win. Look at all that. Look at the COVID-19 shutdown and everything that fell with it. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to be optimistic in times like this. We're going to go over what optimism is, especially realistic optimism. We're going to go over who needs it, why you got to do it, when and where to do it, and even almost how to do it. We're going to go over all these things because I want you, especially you new leaders, to understand that times like this have happened before, not to this degree, but if you can lead through this, you're going to go very, very far with every organization you take charge of. So what type of optimism am I talking about? I'm not talking about these complete rose-colored glasses that just make up positive things to say just because there's so much negativity around. It cannot be all of this, frivolous words, frivolous phrases like nowhere to go but up and it'll all get better soon. Those things may or may not be realistic, but you can be realistic with some sort of establishment from somewhere, some validity, some evidence, some facts. You can find all those things and put them together, and that is more inspiring to people. So that's the type of optimism people want. They want the truth, but they also need some positivity and some inspiration behind that truth. So I call it realistic optimism. Yes, it is going to be a struggle, and we likely have hit the bottom, which means that if we can take all that we can, now that we're down here, we are going to work our way out of this. You see how much more realistic that sounds than nowhere to go but up? Things are tough right now. No lie. We've lost people. We've lost businesses. We've lost resources. We've lost our normal way of doing things. But one thing we haven't lost has been our vision that is going to lead to success. And as long as we have that, we've got something to aim for. So let's look at our losses. Let's see what we can get out of all this. And let's start working towards that vision once again. You see how much more realistic that sounds? Those types of phrases, that type of talk, that's the type of optimism people want. And you can tailor it to your organization. You know where to put in the facts, what you've seen or heard that's been inspiring. There's lots of inspiring stories around that have happened because of the COVID-19 shutdown. And in fact, go look for them. Look for them on YouTube. Look for them anywhere. People have those stories out there, and those stories can apply to you as well. So that is what realistic optimism is. Now, who do you have to say this to? Well, before you tell anybody else, you got to convince yourself. So yeah, it is important to be realistic. I'm telling you, you cannot just say things that you don't believe and expect no one to catch on. People can tell when you don't believe your own words. They may pretend that they agree with you, but they can tell. They're being hopeful as well, but it's a very fragile type of hopefulness when you just say things you don't believe. So whatever it is that you find that is a realistic optimism, you have to believe those words yourself. You have to believe them with no shred of doubt. All sincerity, but no shred of doubt. If there are things that you don't believe, don't insert them. Don't include them in your piece of optimism that you're going to convince to people. It's not being blissfully ignorant of the facts, because the facts are the facts. But when you are trying to inspire people by giving them rays of hope with optimism, you have to believe it 100% yourself before you say it. And then when you're convinced, then you can start talking to everyone else. Then you can start talking to your coworkers, your colleagues, your subordinates, all those that you're going to lead. That is when you can tell them. So how? How do you do it? Well, again, be specific. Use statistics. Use personal examples. Facts. Small success stories. When this shutdown happened, and I talked about this earlier, my current work, I work with foster children that need behavioral or mental health services as they get moved from home to home. And when the shutdown happened, that completely cut off my ability to see them eye to eye. And I used to visit my clients, every few weeks just to pop in and say hello. And I couldn't do that. So I couldn't get a good read. And it was really bumming me out. It really took me down some. But I had to be optimistic and say and start looking at the local numbers and saying, you know what? We're learning more and more about this virus. And it looks like that if I can mask up and keep an acceptable social distance and be careful about it, I can see my clients eye to eye. And as time goes on, we learn that the children were not as susceptible to COVID-19 or even as big spreaders. And I was like, okay, this gives me more and more hope. And then we also learned how to use technology and how to do a lot more audio and video communications with kids. So even if I couldn't see them in person, I had ways of seeing them at least through a computer screen. And that started giving me some hope and some optimism. And as time went on, I was able to go see these kids face to face. And that just kept inspiring me to go on. And those are realistic things. Yes, realistically speaking, it's not the same as always being in the same room within 6 feet, no masks, and so we can all read all our body language and the nonverbal cues. But it is better than nothing. And that is what I had to write off of. So that's how you do it. You use specifics, you use facts, personal examples, small success stories. That's what is going to be included in whatever optimism you need to convey to those you are leading. Now, where and when do you do this? I would say on the regular. It doesn't have to be the same speech to where people become desensitized to it, but small bits and pieces of optimism in every conversation you have with every subordinate, and then every big meeting that you have, every major communication that you have, include this realistic optimism. Make it especially the last thing that you say. Make it the last thing people are leaving with. Something small. Make your own catchphrase that applies to whatever it is you told them. Whatever it is that you told them. Again, it's already a tough challenge taking over, but this is what's going to set you apart as a leader, is having this realistic optimism. So remember, you're doing this because you have to inspire people. It really is the only way you can push forward towards a vision. You got to convince yourself. You got to use realistic examples, small success stories, facts, all those things. You got to use it on the regular, and especially at the end of whatever big communication you have to say. I'm telling you, when people are going to look back and see how you led them out of this. I mean, even as we speak, we've got vaccines. No one knew when a vaccine was going to come. Even as I am recording this, we have vaccines being distributed, and it's starting to work slowly but surely. And so the vaccines, how they're supposed to work is the virus, if you get it, it dies a lot quicker before it can spread anywhere. And as that continues on, that makes more and more room for us to get closer and closer to each other and resume what we assumed was normal. And we did this in record time. So as this is happening and you are leading with information like that, with your organization, it's going to be with a lot less stress and more success for you as a leader. So yes, optimism inspires progress. Never forget that. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Bright Insights. For more information on how to have less stress and more success, visit brightinsightsmedia.com.
If you enjoyed this episode in particular, or the Bright Insights podcast overall, subscribe and share with your friends. That gives us a little more visibility. And with that, we can all have less stress and more success.
Tramp Loop Media.